They say every mother remembers the moment she gave birth to her child. I remember the silence that followed. The nurse had placed Mark in my arms, and I looked into his face and swore I would never let this world hurt him. I had no idea it would be him who tried to break me in the end. Saturday night. The city was lit like a jewel box, one of those early spring evenings where the air feels expensive, crisp, almost suspiciously perfect. I stood outside the glass doors of the Eastwood Gallery, clutching a small velvet box in my gloved hands. Inside was the only thing I had left from my late husband, a diamond necklace. He gave it to me when I turned 30. I was going to donate it tonight. Not because I needed to prove anything, but because Mark, my son, was hosting a charity gala. His name was printed in gold on the invitation, Director of Community Hearts Foundation. It sounded noble, it sounded worthy. I wanted to believe it was real. The valet didn't recognize me. That was fine. I didn't expect him to. People only see what they want to see. An older woman in a blue coat, not tailored, not flashy, just neat. The kind of coat someone like Sophie, my daughter-in-law, would call practical with a smirk. She liked designer things, and she liked reminding me that I didn't own any. I stepped inside and was immediately swallowed by a world that didn't belong to me. Crystal chandeliers, waiters in white gloves, laughter that floated like smoke, thin and cold. I spotted Mark across the room. His back was straight, suit flawless, hand resting gently on Sophie's waist. He looked polished, important, like the kind of man magazines wrote about, like someone who had never grown up watching his mother scrub motel bathrooms just to put food on the table. I moved toward him, slowly, carefully. My heels clicked softly on the marble. He didn't see me. Sophie did. Her lips curled upward, but not with warmth. It was the kind of smile that could slice skin if you got too close. I raised a hand slightly, half a wave, half a gesture of peace. That's when she turned her head and whispered something into Mark's ear. He stiffened. Then he turned around. For a second, I thought he might hug me, that he'd say something kind. Instead, he glanced at the box in my hand, then back at my face. "Mum," he said flatly, "this section is for high-level donors. The main ballroom is that way." He didn't point. He didn't need to. Behind me, people had stopped talking. The air shifted. I felt their eyes press against my spine like needles. Sophie touched his arm, leaned in, voice loud enough for the guests nearby to hear. Maybe somewhere more affordable would be more comfortable for her. I stood very still. My heart didn't race. It didn't have to. It was too old for that. I just looked at them both, and then I laughed. Not the kind of laugh that floats away. This one came from the part of me that had held every insult, every cold dinner alone, every unreturned call. It cracked open the silence in that gallery like a hammer through glass. Mark blinked. Sophie flinched. Someone whispered behind me. I turned without another word and walked toward the opposite side of the room. I didn't need a spotlight. I was the light now. And if anyone's wondering why I didn't scream, why I didn't cry or storm out like some broken mother with nowhere to go, let me answer that. I didn't need a seat at their table, because I owned the damn building. I left the gala with my head high and my throat burning, not from tears. That part of me had dried up years ago. I didn't take a cab. I didn't wait for the valet. I walked 3 blocks in heels that pinched my toes, holding the velvet box like a weapon. The city lights blurred into each other, but my mind was sharp. Every breath I took felt like it was fueling a fire that had been building in my chest for too long. They had finally done it. They had drawn the last line in the sand. When I got home, I didn't take off my coat. I didn't sit down. I went straight to the back of the house, into the laundry room, and pulled aside a tall cabinet. Behind it was a key, taped to the back wall. A key no one else knew existed. Not Mark. Not Sophie. No one. I used it to open the door to the garage, then to the false wall behind the old freezer. And there it was. The room they had never seen. My archive. My arsenal. Inside were 4 metal filing cabinets, a safe, and a desk with a lamp that flickered when the weather changed. The walls were lined with boxes labeled in my handwriting. Lease agreements, business records, photos, bank slips, audio cassettes. I turned the lamp on and sat down. My legs ached, my hand trembled when I reached for the first folder. Mark's name was on it. I flipped it open and there it was. The document from 5 years ago, where he'd convinced me to co-sign a loan for his new office space. I was the guarantor. The only reason he got the loan was because of my signature. The paper still had the coffee stain from the day he promised I'd never be involved in anything stressful again, that I could relax, that he'd take care of everything now. I opened the next folder. Sophie, a transfer of ownership contract. She had pushed me to sign it under the pretense that it would help with tax issues if I temporarily transferred the condo's title to her name. I never got it back. They now called it their second home. I called it theft. And then, at the bottom of the drawer, I found the notebook. It was black, worn, with a broken spine. My husband's handwriting was on the first page. It used to be his ledger. When he passed, I turned it into mine. I used it to track every dollar I saved, every investment I made. Small things at first. A vending machine partnership, a dry cleaning business, then a share in the Eastbrook Medical Building, and finally my stake in Lirio, the very gallery where my son had just humiliated me. My name wasn't on the sign, but it was on the deed. I flipped to the most recent page. The ink was still fresh. I had made a note 2 days ago to finalize the paperwork on a commercial property Sophie didn't even know I owned. She once bragged at dinner that she wanted to buy into it. She had no clue it already belonged to me. I took out my phone and opened the recorder app. I pressed play. A conversation from 3 weeks ago. Sophie's voice, clear as a bell, laughing while she told Mark I was becoming more of a liability than a help. Mark had replied, calm and calculated, that maybe it was time to start looking at retirement homes. I leaned back in the chair and stared at the ceiling. I could have screamed. I could have smashed something. But what would be the point? They had already decided I didn't belong in their world. What they didn't know was that they were standing on ground I built, and I was done letting them spit on it. I turned to the safe, punched in the code, and pulled out 2 USB drives. One was labeled family, the other insurance. I placed both on the desk. Then I picked up a pen, flipped to the first blank page in the notebook, and wrote a single sentence. No more silence. My hands were steady now. My heart was no longer breaking. It was rebuilding. And I knew exactly where to start. Mark's condo was still in my name. Sophie's design business still used my capital. And the charity fund Mark paraded around in public. Half of that came from my money. They thought they were cutting me out. But they had only drawn a map for me to strike back. And I would. Not with lawyers, not with yelling, with precision, with facts, with receipts. I stood up, pulled the chain to turn off the flickering lamp, and closed the door to the archive behind me. They had made a mistake. They had forgotten who raised them. 2 days after the gala, I made the first move. I called Sarah. She answered with that soft voice she always used when unsure who was on the other end. I didn't waste time. I said her name. She went quiet. Then I told her I wanted to meet. Just 15 minutes. Somewhere private. Sarah wasn't just some old friend. She was the long-term partner of Caleb, Mark's youngest uncle. And more importantly, she was sharp, observant. She had been circling the edge of that family for nearly a decade, always watching, always absorbing. She'd seen the games, the pecking orders, the subtle shifts in loyalty that happened during family dinners. She wasn't blind. We met at a quiet cafe on the edge of Midtown. Not one of those trendy places where Sophie liked to sip overpriced espresso and post fake candids. This place had chipped mugs, a waitress who looked like she'd punch anyone who asked for almond milk, and a corner booth I had sat in many times when I needed to think. Sarah showed up 10 minutes early. She slid into the booth without a word and looked at me like she already knew this wasn't just a social call. I pulled out my phone and placed it on the table. I didn't press play. Not yet. I wanted her to hear it after I gave her the full story, not the edited version Mark liked to tell everyone about his sweet, forgetful mother who was stuck in the past. I gave her the truth. Not all of it. Just enough. She listened. Her eyes didn't blink much. She didn't interrupt. Just nodded, occasionally pressing her lips together like she was physically trying to hold back a reaction. When I was done, I finally played the recording. Mark's voice, low and careless, filled the space between us. We're wasting too much time with her. She's not useful anymore. We need that condo back before she decides to leave it to some charity or worse, starts asking questions. Then Sophie's voice, smug and clipped. She's old. She'll forget. Or die. Either way, we'll get it. I paused the recording there. Sarah didn't move for a moment. Then she whispered, I always knew they were selfish. But this is something else. I leaned forward, kept my voice calm. They think I'm done, that I'm out. They're comfortable, too comfortable. They've forgotten I still know where all the bodies are buried. Sarah looked at me with something close to respect. You want to go public? Not yet. I want pressure. I want them paranoid. And I want you to help me push the first domino. She hesitated. Then she said one word. How? I pulled out an envelope. Inside were photos, screenshots, emails, a copy of a text Mark had sent Caleb 2 years ago, the one where he'd begged him to convince me to sell the lake house. He said he'd give Caleb a cut. Sarah flipped through it in silence. When she finished, she said nothing, but her jaw was set. She slid the envelope back toward me. Keep it. You'll need that when you press harder. I nodded. Then I said the one thing that changed everything. Mark's scared of exposure, but he's terrified of losing control, especially over Sophie. That got her attention. Sarah raised an eyebrow, leaned in. You think I should talk to her? I shook my head. No, I think you should talk to Mark, directly, just enough to let him know the walls are closing in. Mention the lake house. The text. Don't accuse, just plant the seed, and say you're not the only one who knows. Sarah didn't smile, but she didn't say no either. The next morning, I waited. I didn't have to wait long. By noon, my phone buzzed. A message from a blocked number. It read, "We need to talk. No name, no signature." But I knew who it was. Mark was never good at hiding his panic, and I wasn't hiding anymore. I replied with a single word, soon. Then I went back to work, back to my files, back to organizing everything into categories, assets, evidence, names, dates, faces. I made 3 backup copies, stored them separately. I wasn't being paranoid, I was being prepared. Mark thought he had trimmed the branches. He didn't realize the roots were still alive, deep, waiting, and now they were growing back fast, and sharper than ever. The invitation came on a Tuesday, a family dinner, hosted by Mark and Sophie. Casual, just us, no formalities. I read the message twice before deleting it. I already knew what it was. Not a reconciliation, not a gesture of love. It was a trap, a test, a final attempt to reassert control before things slipped out of their hands completely. I accepted anyway. The dinner was set for Friday night, 7 p.m. at their place. The same condo I technically still owned, the same address on the mortgage documents signed with my name on the bottom and theirs nowhere in sight. I dressed simply, not to impress, not to provoke, just to be undeniable. When I arrived, the lights were too bright, the table too perfect, the wine already poured, and their smiles, those were fake enough to crack under pressure. Mark pulled out my chair. Sophie kissed my cheek. She even complimented my scarf. It was silk. She had once called it cheap. I sat down and waited. Small talk filled the first half hour. Work. Weather. A trip to Vermont they were planning. No one mentioned the gala. No one mentioned Sarah. The air buzzed with something they were trying too hard to bury. And then it began. Mark leaned forward, his elbows on the table like he was ready for negotiation. "Mum, we've been talking. With everything changing, we thought maybe it was time to sort out a few things." I didn't respond. Sophie jumped in, her voice soft, like smoke curling around a dagger. "We just want to make sure you're taken care of, that things are clear, in case anything happens." I tilted my head. Let her talk. She reached under the table and pulled out a manila folder. She laid it in front of me like it was a peace offering. Just a few documents, nothing complicated. Mostly updates to the condo paperwork, streamlining ownership, making it easier to handle things legally. I placed my hand over the folder without opening it. "Sophie," I said calmly, "did you know this condo is still in my name?" She froze. A flicker, almost invisible. But I saw it. Mark's jaw tightened. "It's just paperwork, Mum. We thought you'd appreciate not having to manage it anymore." I smiled. Not wide, not sweet, just enough to make both of them shift in their seats. I opened my bag and pulled out a folder of my own. I placed it next to theirs. "Before I sign anything, I think you should see this." Sophie looked at Mark. Mark looked at me. He reached for it, opened it, flipped through the first page, then the second. His fingers slowed down by the third. It was a copy of the investment report, the one showing my 48% ownership in the gallery where he had thrown me out, the one he bragged about funding through his charity connections. I let the silence thicken. Sophie's voice cracked. "Where did you get this?" I answered without blinking. "From my office, the one I've had for the last 15 years, the one you passed every week on your way to your Pilates class without noticing the name on the mailbox." Mark stood up. Sophie reached for her wine. "I wasn't done. That gallery, that foundation you flash around, the designer furniture, the catered parties, you've built it all on top of things you never earned." Sophie laughed once. Dry, nervous. "You're twisting everything. We've never taken anything from you." I leaned back in my chair. "You took my name off every family photo in your living room." Sophie rolled her eyes. "That's ridiculous." Mark sat down, his face pale. I kept going. "You pushed me out of decisions. You told people I was sick, that I forgot things, that I was better off resting." Mark interrupted. "Because you've been acting like a victim. Everything has to be about you. I stared at him. My son, the boy I once carried for blocks when he was too tired to walk. I pulled out one last thing from my bag. A copy of the gala floor plan, highlighted in red, the donor seating section, marked in blue, the security footage stills showing me being turned away. I handed it to him. You thought I'd forget. You counted on that. You counted on me being too old, too soft, too used to being pushed aside. Mark's hands trembled. Sophie whispered something under her breath. I stood up. This condo, this wine, this entire image you've built, it exists because I let it, and now I'm done letting it. Mark looked up. You came here to threaten us. I shook my head. I came here to remind you. I have nothing to prove. But you have everything to lose. I turned and walked toward the door. Before I left, I said one final thing. Next time you ask me to dinner, make sure the seat is mine before I walk in, because the next time, I might bring guests. And cameras. Then I closed the door behind me. Let them sit in the silence they created. Let them stew in it. Let them finally feel what it was like to be on the outside looking in. Because I wasn't their burden anymore. I was the storm. 2 days after that dinner, something shifted. I didn't hear from Mark. I didn't expect to. But the silence was heavier than usual. The kind of silence that comes before a storm breaks. I had already made my move. The cards were on the table. Now it was their turn to react. And they did. Not with apologies, not with remorse, but with panic. It started with Sophie. She showed up at my door. No warning, just knocked, wearing oversized sunglasses and holding a tray of bakery muffins like it was some kind of peace treaty. I opened the door, didn't say a word, just looked at her. She smiled, forced and too bright. Thought I'd stop by, talk, maybe clear the air. I stepped aside, let her in. Not because I wanted to hear her, but because I wanted her to see the inside of the apartment she had tried to erase me from. She sat down on my couch like it was unfamiliar, because it was. She hadn't set foot in here in over a year, not since she suggested I start spending holidays at the retirement centre down the street. She cleared her throat, placed the muffins on the coffee table, then spoke with that carefully rehearsed voice she used when trying to land a deal. We were all a little tense the other night. I think things got taken out of context. I let her talk. Mark's been under a lot of pressure, with the foundation, with work. He didn't mean what he said. She paused, glanced at me like she expected a reaction. He's just worried. You know how it is, trying to hold everything together. He's not good with emotion. He gets defensive. I leaned back in my chair. Then she leaned forward. We're just trying to protect what we've built. The reputation, the stability. You of all people should understand that. You've been through worse. I smiled. Cold. Measured. What exactly are you trying to protect him from? Her jaw tightened, but she kept the smile. From fallout. From rumors. You've always been private, always valued discretion. We want to respect that. And then she dropped the act, just for a moment. Look, we know what you're doing. The timing, the pressure, the files, the sudden interest in old paperwork. It's all very calculated. I didn't flinch. Because it is. She stood, voice sharp now. Do you really want this to go public? To drag your own son through the mud? You'll be seen as bitter, petty. No one respects a mother who tears down her own family. I stood too. You think this is about reputation? She hesitated. I kept going. You're worried about exposure, about the image you sold to the world falling apart. You're terrified someone will see behind the curtain and find out you're nothing more than a thief in pearls. Sophie's face drained of colour. You used me, both of you, for money, for property, for access. And when you thought I was too old to fight back, you tried to erase me. From the house, from the photos, from your lives. She snapped. We gave you everything. We made you part of our world, and you threw it back in our faces. No, I corrected her. You offered me a seat at the table you built on my back, and then you pulled the chair when I sat down. She turned toward the door. This is war now. No, I said calmly. War was last week. This is retribution. The door slammed behind her. That night, Mark called, late, voice raw, angry. You had no right to involve Sarah. I said nothing. He kept going. What are you after? Money? Control? Recognition? I answered slowly. I want the truth to come out. I want everyone to see who you really are. I want the masks off. He tried to laugh. It came out hollow. You think anyone will believe you? They already do. I hung up. By morning, the rumors had started. Not from me, but from whispers inside their own circles. Someone leaked details about the gala, about the gallery, about the tension at the foundation. Nothing traceable, but enough to rattle the nest. The next day, a board member from the foundation had resigned without explanation. Another froze funding. Mark was losing control. By Friday, Sophie's design clients began pulling contracts. Her name was now attached to whispers. Too much drama, too much baggage, and it wasn't over. I had planted seeds. Now I was watching them bloom, wild, unforgiving, and entirely mine. It happened on a Sunday night. Rain hit the windows like it had somewhere to be, the kind of storm that made the city feel small, quiet. I was in the kitchen making tea when the call came in, a number I recognized, a voice I knew too well. It's done, he said. I didn't answer. The flash drive's in the mailbox. Back gate. Then he hung up. I opened the door, stepped out barefoot into the cold, and walked to the back gate. Inside the rusted mailbox was a small envelope. No name, no label. I went back inside, dried my feet on the rug, and sat at the kitchen table. I inserted the drive into my laptop, opened the file, and hit play. The screen lit up with grainy footage. Night vision. A narrow kitchen, familiar walls. The camera was well hidden, perfectly angled. I saw Mark. I saw Sophie. And I saw everything unravel in real time. They were mid-argument, voices already raised. You told me it was handled, Mark said, fists clenched at his sides. And you told me she was senile, Sophie snapped back. But she shows up at our door quoting mortgage clauses and waving foundation bylaws like a lawyer. She's bluffing. She's not. Sophie shouted. You saw the papers. You saw the look in her eyes. That wasn't bluff. That was blood. Mark ran a hand through his hair. We pushed too far. No, Sophie barked. You pushed too far. I told you not to delete her name from the foundation's records. I told you not to touch that trust fund until we had full control. She was never going to hand over full control. She was waiting for us to screw up. Sophie's voice dropped. Cold. Calculated. Then we bury it. Delete everything. Sell fast. Liquidate and vanish. And her? Mark didn't answer. She's not stupid, Mark. Neither are we. I paused the video. I sat in silence for a long minute. My hands didn't shake. My breathing didn't spike. I had known. I had always known. But watching it unfold, hearing the way they spoke about me, about the plan to gut everything I built, it flipped something in me. This wasn't just greed. It was betrayal with surgical precision. I opened the next file. Audio only. Clear. Crisp. Same night. Same room. Just later. Mark was alone, talking on the phone, to someone I couldn't see. She's getting in the way. I'm serious. She's going to ruin everything. If she leaks that footage, we're done. The board will pull out. Donors will back off. The gallery will tank overnight. I'm not saying hurt her. I'm saying shut her up. Legally, financially, whatever it takes. She's got assets. We need to block them. Freeze her accounts. Get a lawyer. Use mental incompetency if we have to. She's almost 70. No one will question it. I stopped the playback. There it was, clear as day. My own son, planning to strip me of my legal rights, freeze my bank accounts, silence me through power of attorney claims, and frame it all as concern, as protection, as love. And I had it all. Documented, time-stamped, admissible. I copied the files to a second drive, locked them in the safe, and then did something I hadn't done in years. I called Elias. He picked up after 2 rings. I'm ready, I said. You sure? I'm sure. Meet me tomorrow. 11 a.m. My office. Click. I slept 4 hours that night. Not out of fear, out of clarity. By morning, I had sent the footage to my attorney. By noon, 3 backup copies were stored across 3 cities. By sunset, I had scheduled a private interview with a journalist who had been chasing a corruption scandal involving non-profit abuse and misappropriated donor funds. I knew the moment I clicked send on that email, nothing would be the same. And I didn't care. I wanted the fire. Let it burn. They wanted a war of paper and whispers. I was bringing cameras and floodlights. That night, I sat in the dark, sipping tea, the house completely silent around me. And I made a promise. If Mark wanted to erase me from the story, I would write myself back in bold, in ink, with receipts, and a spotlight he could never escape. It all came crashing down the next morning. At 7:41 a.m., the Community Hearts Foundation released a statement confirming Mark's resignation, effective immediately. No thanks, no tribute, just a cold, clean break. At 8:03, Sophie's design firm announced they were terminating her contract due to reputational concerns and client withdrawals. Her name was wiped from the website within the hour. At 8:32, my attorney Marlene called. It's time. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. I had been patient long enough. By 9 o'clock, the legal notices were delivered. Mark received his via certified mail and email. A formal demand to vacate the condo within 30 days. The property was legally mine, and the title history proved it. He had no lease, no rights, no claim. The furniture was his. The walls, the floors, the air they breathed, that belonged to me. Sophie's came 10 minutes later. A cease and desist for using any of my prior funding or business references in her portfolio. Every contract she landed over the past 5 years was built off connections I had personally secured. Now she was barred from invoking my name, my past investments, or my associations. If she did, we would pursue legal action, and we had the money and evidence to win. The silence from them lasted 4 hours. Then the screaming began. At 1:17 p.m., Mark called. I let it ring. He called again. Then again. On the 4th attempt, I picked up and said nothing. His voice came in hot. Too fast. Too loud. You're throwing us out. I didn't answer. You're evicting your own son. Still nothing. He kept going. After everything we built, everything we gave you, I finally spoke. Everything you gave me was already mine. You just recycled it with your name on the envelope. He snapped. You're out of control. This isn't justice. This is vengeance. I stayed calm. This is documentation. This is enforcement. This is what happens when someone digs a grave and falls into it. He tried to regroup. We can talk. We can fix this. You don't want to burn it all down. I let that sit. Then I said, you already lit the match. And I hung up. At 2:35, Sophie arrived at my door. No muffins this time. No sunglasses. She didn't knock. She banged. I opened it slowly. She looked like she hadn't slept. Her mascara was smudged, her lips cracked, her voice was hoarse. You can't do this. You can't just take everything and walk away. I kept my expression neutral. I'm not walking away. I'm finally walking through the door you've been trying to slam in my face. She stepped forward. You're destroying his life. Our life. I took a breath. You destroyed it. The moment you decided my usefulness had an expiration date, the moment you decided charity was better than dignity. She broke then, her shoulders shook. Please, she whispered, don't do this. We can't survive this. He has nowhere to go. I stared at her, long enough for the pause to feel painful. I survived motel cleaning. I survived sleeping in a chair for weeks while Mark was in the hospital as a child. I survived losing my husband without insurance. I survived watching you parade my money like it was your own. So yes, you'll survive. She looked down. I closed the door in her face. By 6 p.m., the story was on national news. The housekeeper turned investor, the mother who evicted her son, the silent benefactor. The headlines were ruthless. Some called it empowering, some called it cruel. But no one ignored it, and every single photo of me was taken from that gala, the one where I had been told to leave. By 7:10, Elias texted, "It's done." And it was. The locks were changed, the accounts secured, the assets frozen. Mark's name was scrubbed from every shared asset. Sophie's design profile vanished into an archive no one would browse. The weight I had carried for decades lifted, not because I was free, but because I had finally stopped apologizing for existing. I sat in the same kitchen where I used to cook for 2 boys who never understood the cost of my silence. Now they did. And the price was everything. The courtroom was colder than expected. Not the temperature, the tone, the looks, the silence. The media wasn't allowed inside, but they waited just beyond the glass doors, cameras already rolling. A dozen microphones pointed like spears, ready to feast. I walked in with Elias and Marlene by my side. I wasn't dressed for theatrics, no makeup, no red carpet outfit, just a clean black suit and the truth. Mark was already there, sitting at the defendant's table like a ghost of himself. His hair was messy, his suit too big, his hands twisted in his lap. Sophie sat behind him, not next to him. Her eyes were bloodshot, but dry. They hadn't spoken to each other once since I entered. The judge reviewed the documents, brows furrowed in silence. The only sound in the room was the flipping of pages and the tapping of pens. Then, without a glance at Mark, she looked at me. "You may speak." I stood. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I just laid it out like a ledger. I stated my name. I listed the accounts. I named the properties. I provided timestamps, transfers, loans, payments, ownership records. Every investment they had ever touched, I could trace back to my hands, my work, my sacrifice. I mentioned the gala. I mentioned the footage. I mentioned the nursing home recommendation and the forged signature on the foundation transfer. And then I paused. Your Honor, this is not about revenge. This is not a mother punishing her child. This is a woman reclaiming her name. The judge nodded and turned to Mark. His lawyer stood and said they would not contest ownership. He spoke in circles, blamed confusion, blamed administrative mistakes, blamed stress. Not once did they blame themselves. When it was over, the judge made it official. All property rights were reinstated under my name. The attempted POA claim Mark had filed weeks earlier was thrown out as invalid and unethical. The court labelled his conduct exploitative. The Foundation's legal team immediately released a statement distancing the board from his actions. It should have felt victorious. Instead, it felt final. On the steps outside the courthouse, the press crowded in. They didn't ask. They demanded. One reporter raised her voice over the crowd. "Mrs. Whitmore, what will you do now?" I didn't hesitate. I will build something better, something that doesn't forget who built it in the first place. Cameras flashed. That night, Mark showed up outside my apartment. No call, no warning, just him in a hoodie, soaked from the rain. I watched him through the peephole for 10 minutes before I opened the door. He didn't speak right away. When he finally did, his voice cracked. "I didn't think you'd really go through with it. I kept my arms crossed. You thought I wouldn't fight back." He shook his head slowly. "I thought you loved me too much." I studied his face. I did. I still do. But love is not permission. He looked down, breathing heavy. I was scared. When I lost control of the Foundation, when the articles came out. I didn't know what else to do. You lied. You took what wasn't yours. You erased me. His voice barely held. I thought if I could just hold on a little longer, it would fix itself. That's not how the world works. He stared at the floor. His shoes were soaked through. "I didn't mean to become this person." "But you did." He wiped his face. "I'm sorry." I nodded once. Slowly. "I'm not here for apologies, Mark. I'm here for consequences." "So what now? Now you live with what you did." He looked at me like a child again. Not the suit, not the man, just the little boy who used to cry when I left for night shifts. "Can I ever earn it back?" "That depends on you." I closed the door. Behind it, I exhaled. It was done. No more waiting, no more asking, no more shrinking myself to make others comfortable. I didn't burn it down. I just turned on the lights and let them see what they had built in the dark. 3 days after the ruling, I received a message. It was short. No pleasantries, no excuses. "We need to speak. I'll come alone." It was from Mark. I ignored it. That evening, Elias called. He came to the restaurant, said he doesn't want to make a scene. I told Elias to give him 1 hour. No more, no less. At exactly 6 p.m., Mark walked into the private dining room of the terrace. Not the front, not the bar. The very room he once tried to keep me out of. Now it was mine, lit low, quiet. Every chair in the room had been hand-picked by me. The artwork on the wall belonged to the first artist I ever invested in. A woman who once cleaned hotel rooms, just like I did. Mark stood there for a moment, unsure of where to sit. I didn't offer. Eventually, he pulled out the chair across from me and sat down slowly. I watched him. No words, no pity. He looked thinner, deflated, but not broken. Not yet. I came to apologize. "You already did." He exhaled. "This time, I'm not asking for anything." "Good. But I do want to explain. You want to feel better. That's not the same as making it right." He nodded. Accepted it. "I was drowning, Mum. I kept making decisions I couldn't undo, and instead of facing you like a man, I treated you like a liability, like a problem to solve. I waited. Sophie's gone. She left 2 days ago. Said she never signed up for consequences. Said she's not built for public shame. I stayed silent. I deserve every headline, every article, every cold look. I don't need you to confirm it. I already know. You don't get to rebuild until you understand what you destroyed. He looked me in the eye. I destroyed trust. I destroyed the only person who ever sacrificed for me without wanting something in return. You didn't just betray me. You betrayed the idea of me. He flinched at that. I know. You used my money, my name, my silence, and then you tried to erase me. You didn't think I'd fight back because you mistook my love for weakness. He nodded slowly. I did. You treated me like a bank account, like a fading inconvenience. He leaned forward. And I lost everything because of it. I leaned forward too. Then you've barely begun to understand the cost. His voice cracked. I don't care about the foundation, or the condo, or the restaurant. I care about the fact that you won't even look at me the same. That's the part that keeps me up at night. I looked at him then. For the first time in a long time, I didn't see the boy I raised. I saw the man he had become, and the man he might still be. What do you want from me? Nothing. Then why are you here? Because I need to start somewhere. And I thought maybe that place was telling the truth, to your face, without hoping for a reward. I studied him. You want to fix it? Yes. Then you work. You volunteer at the shelters fund. You clean the floors of the building I built. You take shifts at the retirement home where no one gets visitors. You do the same things I did when I was your age. He nodded. I already started. Elias set it up. I've been working at the soup kitchen in South Haven. They don't know who I am, and I don't tell them. I watched his hands. No ring. Sophie's not coming back. He didn't answer. I reached into my bag and slid a folder across the table. Inside were instructions, contracts, a detailed list of obligations, a minimum of 6 months, no shortcuts, no loopholes, no press. He flipped through it, didn't argue. At the end, he asked one thing. Will you ever forgive me? Forgiveness isn't a gift. It's something you earn, and I'm willing to earn it. Then start. I stood. The meeting was over. Mark stood too. But this time, he didn't ask for a hug. Didn't try to force a moment that hadn't arrived. He just nodded, folded the papers, and walked out the way he came. Alone. And I sat back down in the room he once tried to keep me from entering. At the head of the table, where I belonged. Not because I demanded it, because I had built it, from the ground up, and no one would ever push me out of it again. 2 weeks later, the press caught wind of the changes at the terrace. They didn't care about the new charity programs, or the shift in leadership, or the foundation's silent funding of battered women's housing in the area. They only cared that the Marstons were no longer at the top. A picture surfaced, Mark, wiping tables at the South Haven shelter. No designer clothes, no watch, just a thin hoodie and a blank face. It went viral in hours. Some called it a redemption arc. Others said it was a staged performance. But I knew better. It wasn't staged. And it wasn't redemption. It was reckoning. 3 days after the photo broke, I walked into the very same shelter with 2 trays of homemade pot roast and cornbread. I didn't tell anyone who I was. I just dropped the trays off like I used to, when I had nothing to give but food. Mark saw me. He didn't call out, didn't wave. He nodded, kept working. eyes on the task. Good. I left without a word. But it didn't stop there. Sophie's parents reached out next. Not with apologies, with threats. They claimed the public embarrassment had damaged their business, that they might sue for defamation, that I had orchestrated a smear campaign. I invited them to a meeting. Neutral ground. No lawyers. Just facts. I laid out the documentation, the investments I had made, the falsified agreements, the texts between Sophie and her financial advisor discussing how to remove me quietly. They left with pale faces and no words. I never heard from them again. Later that week, Elias told me Mark had applied to manage logistics at the food bank. He wanted responsibility, but he also wanted trust, and I wasn't ready to hand that over. Not yet. So I gave the file to Elias and told him to decide. If Mark failed again, the fallout would be on him. I had washed my hands of expectation. 3 days passed, then 4, then 7. No complaints, no scandals, just quiet work. Until the gala invitation arrived. It was for the grand reopening of the terrace, now under the new structure. Community-driven, non-profit funded, a different kind of legacy. I hadn't planned to attend. I didn't care about speeches or press or champagne. But I changed my mind at the last minute, not because of vanity, but because this was mine. I had built it, and I would not let history pretend otherwise. I walked in that night wearing the same dress I wore to Mark's wedding, the one Sophie had once called dated. I wore it on purpose. I wanted them to remember exactly who they dismissed. The room was glowing, guests from the community, families from the shelters, former staff now promoted to managers, faces I had once helped feed, now helping others. There was no red carpet, no flashbulbs, only purpose. As I walked through the entrance, people turned, not in judgment, not in pity, in recognition. I didn't wave, I didn't smile, I just walked to my seat at the front. Elias gave the opening remarks. He mentioned the past, but didn't dwell on it. He praised the future without erasing the fight it took to get there. And then, without warning, Mark was called to the stage. He looked stunned. He walked up, slow, almost hesitant. He stood behind the podium. No script, no teleprompter. I thought I knew what he'd say. I was wrong. He didn't start with a speech. He started with a story. A story about a single mother who once worked double shifts at 3 jobs to keep him in school. A woman who washed hotel sheets at night and cooked for fundraisers in the morning. A woman who was never thanked properly. And never needed to be. Until now. The room fell quiet. Mark looked at me. Not just with guilt, but with something deeper. Sober acknowledgement. He stepped away from the podium, walked down the stairs, and crossed the floor. He stood in front of me. He didn't kneel. He didn't cry. He held out a piece of paper. Not a check. Not an apology card. A framed resolution. A permanent inscription added to the terrace's foundation documents. It read, "All major decisions must be co-signed by Evelyn Marston or her appointed representative. For life. No vote may override this clause, a legal anchor carved in stone." I stared at it. For a long moment, I didn't move. Then I stood. And for the first time since this all began, I hugged my son. Not because he asked for it, but because he earned it. The applause came later. Soft, respectful, real. After the event, Elias walked me to the car. "You didn't have to forgive him." "I know, but you did." "No, I just stopped needing him to fail. That was enough." As the car pulled away, I looked back at the building, its lights glowing like a second heartbeat. It was no longer just a restaurant. It was proof that survival doesn't mean silence, and forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, only that you've taken back your power, on your terms, and no one else gets to write the ending. I didn't return to the terrace the next day. I spent the morning pruning the rose bushes outside my cottage. The petals were soft and stubborn, holding on through early frost like they refused to wilt. I liked that about them. No audience, no stage, just silent strength. Later I made tea, sat on the porch, let the breeze carry in the scent of earth and memory. No calls from reporters, no begging voicemails from Sophie. No more headlines, just quiet. And it was beautiful. That night, Mark called, not to ask for anything, just to say he got the job. Elias gave him a trial run and said he was solid, steady, no complaints from staff, no shortcuts, no excuses. I told him good. He asked if I wanted to come by sometime, to see the new kitchen, meet the volunteers. I said maybe, but not today. And he didn't press. That was healing, in its own way. Days passed. The money stayed where it was, in the trust, earning interest. No lavish donations, no new properties, just quiet impact, filtered through hands that understood the value of every dollar. I had made peace with the silence, until I opened the mailbox and found the letter. No stamp, no return address, just my name. In neat handwriting I hadn't seen since high school. I opened it slowly, expecting more bitterness, some last gasp of entitlement. Instead, it was from Sophie. 3 pages, no theatrics, just raw honesty. She said she understood if I never wanted to see her again, that she had done unforgivable things, that she let fear of scarcity turn her into something small and cruel. She told me she was starting over, that her parents had cut her off completely, that she was staying in a room above a bakery and working mornings washing dishes. She ended with one line. "You didn't destroy me. You saved me. And I'm sorry I made you carry all the weight." I folded the letter, placed it in the drawer with the others I kept, not to revisit, but to remember, because memory, too, can be sacred. That night, I lit a candle, not for them, for me, and for the version of myself that I used to be, the one who waited on porches for family that never came, the one who kept shrinking herself to fit inside their expectations. She was gone now, not buried, not erased, transformed. In her place stood a woman who no longer needed to be invited, who built her own table, who made her own seat permanent. Weeks later, I visited the terrace again. I wore jeans, a plain shirt, no makeup. Nobody took pictures. Nobody whispered. The hostess smiled and said, "Welcome back, Ms. Marston." She didn't say Evelyn. She didn't say Mom. She said what mattered. Back. Because I was. Back. But different. Whole. I ate lunch alone, watched the families around me, laughed quietly at a toddler who kept dropping his fries just to get them handed back. Mark came by, just to say hi. He didn't linger. He didn't ask for approval. He just smiled. And I smiled back. When I left, I took the long way home, windows down, wind in my hair, music low. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't think about what was taken. I thought about what I reclaimed, not money, not power, myself. And that, in the end, was the only inheritance I ever needed. If this story struck a chord with you, I'd love to hear it. Have you ever found strength after being cast aside, or turned pain into power, just like Evelyn did? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice might be the one that helps someone else reclaim theirs.